My name is Homen Shibrir Akli, and I have the honor of hosting and moderating this evening's event. Now, as you know, Somali Week Festival has been the home of Somali Arts and Culture in the UK for well over 9 years now, and it is an important feature of Black History Month. This year promises to be another great festival with a program packed with performances, talks, and presentations by renowned Somali artists and thinkers. We center each festival around a theme, and this year the theme is home and displacement, which our guests are going to be exploring through different artistic forms and academic discourses. The keynote speech will be delivered by Dr. Edel Osman, who's going to be joining us shortly, we hope. And it will be one of the first of many discussions that offers an insight into the psychological, cultural, social, political, and economic experiences of the global Somali diaspora. It would not be possible to organize such a big event without a small army of volunteers, friends, guests, and sponsors. And I would like to start off first by thanking our sponsors who've made it possible to host this event and to make Somali Week Festival an inspiring event for us to enjoy. The generous sponsorship and enthusiasm from our sponsors is much recognized, and they include the Arts Council of England, the Heb Shield Group, Faro Foundation, Awards for All, Killen Trusts, the Gecko Foundation, Tower Hamlets, Poetry Translation Center, Canary Wharf Group PLC, Taj, SOAS University and University College London, Mia Solicitors, Megan Taxis, Frank Haynes Memorial Trust, and Oasis Care and Training. Before I hand over to our guests for the official welcome, it grieves us all deeply that hundreds of people have lost their lives in last week's attack in Mogadishu. And we would like to take a moment to remember them and join Sheikh Mahmoud Dalmer in prayer in remembrance to the victims of this attack. Sheikh Mahmoud Dalmer, if you wouldn't mind joining me.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa afdalu salat wa azka salam على من بعثه الله رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله الأطهار وصحبه الأبرار runtii wax badan waaba igu adagtay inaan ka idhaahdo waayo ismaan lahayn muqdisho rubuc qarnigii u dambeeyey wixii ka dhacay marka la eego wax malaad dee u hadhayba ma jiraan baan islahaayo leelleel iyo eedaad iyo dhibaato ah laakiin tani waxay noqotay mid dee afkala qaad ah mararkaasoo kale waa markaan xusuusto ninkii carbeed ee shawqi loo jeedo axmed shawqi intiina garanaysee oo qarnigii hore ee labaatanaad horaantiisii arrimo ka dhacay magaalada Damascus ama Dimashq maanta la leelelaysa ayuu markuu gabayga uu ka jiray wuu arartay wuuna magaranaysaa aan yiri maanta hayla yaabina haddii aan hadalka kala lumo waayo waxa dhacay baa ka weyn buu yiri wax la cabiri karo mumaadiratal iraa'ati wal qawafi jalal ar-ruz'i an wasfin yadiqu buri oo yani macnaheedu noqonayo maansada iyo ilihii ilhaamka ka soo bixi jiray maanta raallihayga ahaadeen waayo waxa dhacay baa ka weyn wax la cabiri karo runtiina waxa weeye marka aynu eegno yani waxa meesha ka dhacay tirada dadka dhintay all walks of life dad kala wada duwan oo laakiin shay kale midayo ah inay noloshooda eryanayeen kasab yani xaggaad ka keenta iyo xaggeed caruurtaada kaga korisa waa wax yani aada iyo aada looga murugoodo marka aada suurayso imaajin garayso hooyo khudaar iyo tamaandho iyo intaa ku gadaysay caruur meel ku haysa waynu naqaanaa hooyada soomaalida markay cabaar joogto ay yani wuxuu iibsamaan intay carartaa laga yaaba intay cunto soo siiso inada hooyi waan soo noqonayaa ay ku soo noqoto marketkii caruurtiioo sugaysa yani diirimaadkii hooyadoodiiyo inay maaragtay usoo noqoto inada hooyadiin soo noqon mayso yani waad suurayn kartaan odayga yani meel walba lagu faafiyey curyaanka ah ee yidhi labadii inana i qaadi jirayee aan lahaaye ii miciinka ahaa labadiiba meeshay ku tageen waad suurayn kartaan dadka shaqaysanayay ee iska balladnaa ee afartan yani intay xoolahoodii xisaabanayeen si ay zakada uga bixiyaan iyaga iyo xoolahoodiiba isla shufbeeleen waxa weeye wax yani aan la arag oo la maqal it's really very sad that so many lives were lost in just one go. And it's really almost impossible to fathom and find a logic behind this carnage and the capability of someone who I don't believe have got hearts, but have got twisted minds that are very able to engineer such a thing. Waynu u ducaynaynaa themeka ama mawduuca xitaa sanadka laga hadlayo waxaad moodaysaa dhinac inay arrintani ka taabanayso home and displacement baradaadii iyo ka barakicii marka baradaada marka aad ka kacdo yani oo yani aada physically ka tagto waa one aspect laakiin dhinacyada kale ee barakaca ama displacement ku leeyihi ee xagga nafta ah ee xagga dhaqaalaha ah psychologically socially waxa weeyaan way ka riiq dheer yihiin sida loo daweynayo ama sida loo hagaajinayo displacement, this sad phenomena in human existence and human history. The physical aspect is one thing, but the other side is to it, psychological, social, take much longer to understand, let alone to remedy and rectify. marka hadalka ma badin karo waxa uun aynu ka adagnahay waxa weeye maanta inaynu ka fikirro dadkaas inaynu intii dhammaatay u ducayno laakiin inta hadhayna aynaan ilaawin inta dhimatay anigu there as a believer in God and in the final day of judgment, I believe that at some point they will get the justice they deserve. But as those who remain alive and who were some way or the other connected to this, were gone, never to return to this world, we have to think of them and what we can do. It's not in human, ability to do something about one who is gone, died, but still you have got the capabilities. and I think, with the obligation and responsibility to address those who were left behind with more than, one or gap or gaps in their lives and their existence. Marka Ilaahay waxaan uga baryaynaa Ilaahay inuu naxariisto intii dhimatay, Ilaahay inuu jannadiisii ka waraabiyo, Ilaahay inuu meel meeshan ka roon geeyo, Ilaahay inuu ugu hiiliyo maalinta uu isagu yahay ka u garsooraya khalqigiisa. Intii ay ka tageenna in Ilaahay halkoodii wax khayr qaba u geliyo, innagana inaynaan ilaawin. Can do something, waxbaynu ururin karaa, waxbaynu u qaban karaa, wax walba waxaad yeeshaan maaragtay ha laga hormariyo inta hadhay nool sida aynu xula qaban karayno. And I hope in at least waxa aynu ururin karo iyo waxa aynu gaarsiin karo aynu gaarsiino. They will forever remain in our hearts, and inshallah ta'ala better days will come to them inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Mohammed, Sheikh Dalmar. And just to reiterate again, the rescue and recovery efforts are underway. So there are many ways that hope can trump the despair and sadness that we all feel. And I hope that you will look into supporting the many initiatives that are currently ongoing. It's an immense privilege also for us to be here this evening at the British Library, and we're incredibly happy that the British Library is among one of the many friends of Somali Week Festival, and we're happy to launch the event at this wonderful venue. And I'd like to welcome our host this evening, Marion Wallace, to say a few words about the library and the collection that they've got here that relates to Somali arts and culture. So Marion, if you wouldn't mind joining me. Thank
you. Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to this opening event of Somali Week Festival 27, whose importance is only enhanced, I think, by the somber events of this week. And thank you for that very moving tribute to the people who died. As you've heard, my name is Marion Wallace. As lead curator for Africa here at the British Library, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all. Very pleased that the British Library is able to host this first opening event in a week that promises to be an extremely rich festival of poetry, song, literature, intellectual debate, and much more, celebrating the culture of Somali speakers from Africa and across the world. I was told I only had 5 minutes or less, and I decided to take you on a lightning tour of the British Library's collections in Somali and about the history, politics and culture of Somali speakers. We hold a lot of material, and you are free to get a reader pass and come and use our collections if you wish to. So I'm just going to briefly explain what we've got. The first slide is a few of our books in Somali. All these books have Somali content, even if the title is in English. The one in the middle is quite sweet. It's dual language, English and Somali children's book. We've got quite a large collection of those. There's quite a lot being published. And that's the catalogue address for anyone who wants to look at what we've got. The next one is books about Somalia, Somaliland, the Horn of Africa, and the area. So we've got books in various genres, mostly in English, but the middle image is from our catalogue. It's 3 books in Arabic about Somalia. We've got a small collection of Arabic books about Somalia. We have a very large collection of Arabic books altogether. That's just about the Somali part. Manuscripts, we do have quite a lot of manuscripts relating to Somali speakers, to the Horn of Africa, to East Africa, in the India office records. Many of these have now gone online through a partnership between the British Library and the Qatar National Library. And you can go to that address, just Google Qatar Digital Library, and you can look at these for yourself. And we have a lot of sound collections, masses of Somali music and poetry. We have some are commercial recordings, some were specially recorded. This is just a few catalogue entries for out of a collection of hundreds of items. Most of very little of this material, I'm afraid, is available on the internet. You do need to come into the building to listen to this, and usually you need to make an appointment with the listening service. But it's all here. It can all be made available, so this is an invitation to make use of it. Finally, Reader Pass. It's free to anyone who needs to use our collections. The website tells you how to do it. That's me at the bottom, africa@bl.uk. And I'll leave some of my cards on the stage in case anyone wants to contact me about the collections as well. So, that's it. Lightning tour of the British Library's collections on Somalia and Somali. Once again, I'd like to welcome you all to the British Library and wish you an inspiring evening and indeed a festival. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion, and I hope many of you will take her up on the offer to explore the wonderful collections that we've just been informed about. It is a great privilege at this point to welcome the Deputy Mayor of Social Integration, Social Mobility and Community Engagement, Matthew Ryder. I believe it's his first time here at Somali Week Festival, but it's not the first time that the festival has enjoyed the backing and support of London City Hall, but we're happy that you can be with us this evening. Matthew's going to be providing the official welcome, so quite a daunting task, I imagine, but one that we look forward to listening to. Matthew, if you wouldn't mind joining us here on the panel. You're welcome to start up here if you like. Yeah? Okay, great.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. It's an enormous privilege for us to be here at the opening event for Somali Week Festival. And I'd like to thank everybody who has worked so hard to put this festival on, from the organisations that have taken part, and also for the British Library and everybody else who's here, for something that's obviously a very, very important event in the calendar, the Somali calendar, but also the London calendar, and a very important part of London's cultural history. Before I go any further, I think it's important for me to emphasise that the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, would very much have liked to have been here tonight. Unfortunately, other commitments meant he wasn't able to join me here tonight, but he really did want to be here. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge the saddening events that have happened recently in Mogadishu. And I would like to read out, if I can, a message from the Mayor who wanted to convey this in person, but unfortunately he wasn't able to, so it falls on me to convey it to you. And what he asked me to convey is I'd like to pass on my sincere condolences to the people of Mogadishu following the horrific attack on the city on Saturday. I especially want to pass on my thoughts to the many people who have lost family, friends and loved ones. London stands united with Mogadishu against these appalling acts of violence inflicted upon innocent citizens. And I think I would like certainly to echo the Mayor's message. I think all of us across the world know the horror of terrorist acts, but what happened last week affects us all. I think it affects us all as human beings. We all feel the pain of those who go through that sort of suffering. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that it has a special resonance for the thousands and thousands of Somali people here in London who have a special connection to such a tragic event. And it's very important for us as all Londoners to stand together with the community here and make sure that we are able to move together and give what assistance we can. So I would really like to emphasise that and emphasise the Mayor's feelings that I've tried to convey in the message from him tonight. First of all, I would like to say at the opening of this event, thank you obviously for everything that this event involves. From the point of view of my job, as you've heard, I have a very long title, Social Integration, Social Mobility and Community Engagement. But it means really interacting with London's communities to make sure that London's communities connect with each other and live together and understand one another in a constructive way. I was lucky enough to have a meeting with members of the Somali community early this year, and it was clear to me when I met with those people that this festival stood out as a really important event in the London calendar and something that we should support. I think it's very important to understand that we see these kind of cultural events that celebrate the intellectual, the cultural, and the learning and arts from all across the world in different ways make up part of the diversity of London. And it's a diversity that we want to celebrate. Part of my job is to ensure that we all learn more about each other and we're able to go into the depths of each other's culture and understand each other better, and in doing so, become more unified as a city. I don't have to explain to the people in this room how important London, or how important the Somali community is to London. But if it needs emphasis, I'd like to emphasise it. We see the Somali community as being part of the heart and soul of London, a very important of London's diverse tapestry. And as a result, we want to do everything we can to give the support where it's needed. And I feel some really constructive meetings, advice, and we hope to do much more into the future in supporting what cultural events and other important issues that we can that affect the Somali community. Some of them serious, some of them cultural, some of them positive, some of them present difficulties, but all of them I hope we can work on together and represent really how important Somali culture and Somali people are as part of this city. I really like the themes, and I want to say I really feel very strongly about the themes of this year's festival. You probably know that well over 30%, nearly 40% of Londoners were born somewhere else out of London. And in particular, many of us, myself included, are the children of immigrants or are immigrants themselves. And London celebrates that diversity and celebrates the fact that we welcome people from all over the world. And it's so important, I think, to be here in the British Library and to be welcome as part of our collective heritage, our collective history, how much we all are connected with this city, London, and how much we all share in common. So thank you very, very much to everybody organising this. I'm really looking forward to being part of the panel later on to have some interesting discussions, and I hope to be able to join in the festival. So thank you very much for everybody for tonight, and I look forward to joining in the discussions later on.
I'm incredibly happy and proud to welcome the next speaker. She represents a new generation of Somali academics and inspires us all with hope and excitement for the future of Somali academia. Dr. Idil Osman is a teaching fellow, senior teaching fellow at SOAS, University of London, and the author of a newly published book called Media, Diaspora and the Somali Conflict. As well, Dr. Idil has for many years been a champion of this festival and contributed to countless panels. We've always called on her generosity to come chair panels and contribute, and it's a real honor to have her as a keynote speaker this evening. The keynote speak is going to revolve around the theme, as I mentioned, home and displacement, but I'll leave it to Idil to give you more details about that. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Idil Osman. Also on the panel with us is another bright young Somali academic. How fortunate we are. Hannah Ali is a teaching fellow and PhD candidate at SOAS University. Her research focuses on the questions and the concepts of home identity and displacement. And in addition to that, she's also part of the driving force between Somali Week Festival. So welcome, Hannah, if you wouldn't mind joining us. There you are on the panel as well. Last but not least on the panel, we have got Julian Riley. Julian is here on behalf of Julian is with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and one of the great supporters again of Somali Week Festival. Really, despite these small hiccups with the visa, the festival wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't be possible to have the visiting artists without the support of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So Julian today is going to be responding to the panel. But he will also join us in the panel at the very beginning. Please welcome Julian Riley. We will start off first with our keynote speech by Dr. Idil Usman. Idil, you're welcome to either stay here or
Well, I'm comfortable now that I'm
seated. Now that you're
so.
I wouldn't want to displace you again, so let's start.
Good, okay. Thank you very much for the lovely introduction. Apologies, I'm nursing a cold, but I'm going to try and speak as clearly as I can. For me, the theme of the Somali Week Festival this year really hits home quite closely, both on a professional and on a personal level. I am a refugee myself who's fled the civil war with my parents and have come here initially starting our journey in Holland, and then moving to Leicester when I was 15. So that means I have a personal connection and experience of what displacement means. And in the Somali context, really when we're talking about displacement, we're talking forced displacement. So it's not a choice that was made. It's not something that we decided to do. It was forced upon us. And that really resonates with the reason why the Somali diaspora are so intimately connected to their homeland. Professionally, my own background is in media and communications, but I look at diasporic media and the relationship that they enable between migrant communities and their homeland. So again, this feels very comfortable for me, and I'm quite happy and I appreciate it this week, even though all of the past 10 years themes have been really interesting. I think we're in the 11th year now, aren't we? Somali Week Festival is growing.
11th year. Yeah. Under Kate, Somali Arts and Culture, it's the 9th year, but as you know, under Oxford House, it's been running for a little bit longer.
Yes, yeah. I remember we started in 2006, right?
Correct.
Yeah, it's been going on for a long time, and may it long continue. Now, one of the things that comes from that close, intimate connection that diaspora communities have. If this was my class, I would be shaming that person for not silencing their phone. So please do silence it if you haven't done so already. I'm looking at you all. Okay. One of the things that comes from that intimate connection that we as a Somali diaspora have with the homeland really is facilitated and galvanized and helped by the globalized world that we live in, with the communication that really have become a lot more advanced technologically. It's suspended at time and distance for us, and it means that even though we are physically here, mentally, emotionally, we can be with our brothers and sisters and relatives and family and communities back in Mogadishu. And this is particularly important now, with the carnage that took place in over last weekend. I think the moving speech that Sheikh Dalmar has given really has done it justice. But the magnitude of what has happened, for me, really is something that hasn't happened before. And I think we've been touched and moved and outraged across the globe because of the level of intensity that has taken place. This is, again, when I tend to appreciate media and communication platforms. I mean, as scholars, we often tend to criticize media because, the stereotyping that happens, the bias and the sort of lack of balanced views that are often portrayed doesn't help. And then on top of that, outside of the Somali circles, we really are in an era of populism where fake news trumps real news, and we've got things like alternative facts and Trumpism, being the news of the day. So for me, this is one moment when, as a media and communication scholar, I can actually celebrate the fact that social media platforms have enabled us to raise funds in a matter of hours that will, that have been far more than what the US has donated or what any other international community donor has been able to give. I mean, yesterday I saw a tweet that showcased that the young people in Bossasa alone in Puntland have raised $500,000 within a span of a few days. I mean, this is just young people in Bossasa and Garowe, not even the whole of Puntland. So you can see the level of potential and magnitude that the Somali people have, especially when they come together at times like this. I think it's really important that we've had the recognition of the humanity and the level of loss that was displayed across the world. We've seen how cities like Toronto have responded. We've seen the public responses by the officials in Minnesota, in places like Paris with the Eiffel Tower. I would like to say to the Deputy Mayor that it would be very nice if Sadiq Khan responded publicly to recognize this tragedy. And we really appreciate the message that he's conveyed through you. But as British Somalis who live in London, we expect our mayor to be at the forefront of the public support that is displayed for the people that are so devastated by what has happened over there. So it would be very nice if you could convey that message to him.
I will.
Now, moving on to the activities of the young people themselves, especially the diasporas that have gone back. Again, we see how they are able to really galvanize and make the maximum potential of social media come to light with platforms like Gurma 252. We've seen how they've been able to display the death toll and the level of the level of impact that has had, just by simple categorization, things like, listing the number of people that have died, the demographics of it, so how many were parents, how many were mothers, how many were fathers, how many were single, parents, sole breadwinners, how many were children, the number of people that have been able to go to the Somali hospitals, the ones that are in Mogadishu, that have been able to find a bed there, the ones whose injuries are so severe that they can't be treated inside Somalia, which means that they can then be taken abroad to places like Turkey and so on. They've been able to outline the challenges of the medical things that are missing. So that means, countries like Djibouti can respond with medical doctors, excuse me, with medical doctors and specific medical assistance that is needed, so things like DNA testing tools. This really, I think, shines the positive aspects of how social media technology can help with a disaster like this. For me, tragedies like this showcase the real sense of humanity that the Somali people embody. I personally had an effect, not on a similar level, but these suicide attacks, the terrorist attacks tend to happen far too often than we need to see. We don't need to see this at all. And I remember a similar one that happened in 2013, where the death toll was, I think, between 30 and 50, but amongst them was my aunt. And she was from London. She was holidaying in Mogadishu with her 5 children, 5 of her 6 children. And she was a shareholder in the restaurant that was targeted at that time. For me, I was the only one that was the closest family member that was there. So when she was killed in the attack, that meant her 5 children immediately became without a mother. And so I had to take them in. It took me weeks to reorganize everything from, their just logistical stuff like their travel and getting them to move from where they were staying to my hotel, and being able to find rebookings of their tickets to then go, to come back to London. Their father was still here, but he was completely paralyzed by the shock. He couldn't move. The chair that my mom was telling me, the chair that he was sitting on when he received the news was where he stayed for more than 48 hours. He wouldn't go toilet, he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't sleep, he just became paralyzed. And so it fell on me to look after those children and to bring them back to London. And I mean, for me, I have never looked after children except for my younger siblings, let alone, young children from the ages of 6 to 10 to 12, 15, 17, who were forced to bury their mother, that they didn't want to do. For me to look after children in that state of mind was extremely traumatizing, and I did the best that I could. I brought them back, but all the while, every single minute I'm thinking, how can I best look after them? What do I do? You're completely at a loss. You have no guidance. You have nowhere to begin. And at that time, the flights were still going through Wajer. For those of you who know, when you go into Mogadishu, we had to go through Wajer, and that that's a hellish experience on its own. But for me, it was extra troubling and more difficult because there's no legal connection between me and my cousins. We don't have the same passports. There's no evidence that I am a legal guardian of them. I'm not their legal guardian, So all that time, that was severely problematic and frustrating for me. And, I brought them back here and, they're all fine, but it took me 3 years to overcome that. I didn't go back to Mogadishu between 2013 and just last year. So it's over 3 years that I was unable to go back, even though my work and from data collection to all the research that I need to do depends on me having to go back and forth. But these kind of things have a severe impact on you, and that's me coming from a privileged position. And so when you think about the people on the ground in Mogadishu who have to deal with this on a regular basis, for whom this is not the first time that they've lost a loved one, when you think about the level of impact that this has on them, not just in the immediate sense of having to arrange funerals and having to find ways to locate the missing people, it's beyond that. The psychological trauma that this leaves on you really grinds on your humanity. It really grinds on your humanity. And that's what creates people to become traumatized as a default position. So these are the kind of things that I want us to think about. I want us to think about what happens when the dust settles. What happens when weeks from now we go back to our daily lives, we go back to how things are happening, how things have been. What do we do then? If we go by history, we tend to be really good at coming together at times of crises. We're also very good at coming together for festivals like these. But in our day-to-day lives, we live in our own enclaves. We live amongst the most that are familiar to us, amongst the people that share whatever fluid identities, and that's what happens in conflict, in conflict context. It's not unique to the Somalis, but identities become fragmented and fluid depending on what has happened. And so we live in our own little bubbles and we don't come out of it. So what I want us to do as we are enjoying and participating in this festival, I want us to think about what it is that brings us together. In times of crises, in times of jubilation, times of celebration, what is it that brings us together? All of us here are from all walks of lives, and I'm speaking directly to the Somali people now. When we are thinking about responding to an immediate crisis, you don't think about the political differences, the ideological differences, the cultural differences between us. Our immediate response is, how can I help? What can I do? And that's what brings us together. For me, those efforts in one word can be called Somaliness. It's the Somali public that comes into being when things like that happen. But what I want us to do is for that to become a consistent activity that unites us, despite whatever differences that exist between us. We should be able to be a public that can have ideological differences, that can have political differences, that can have social and cultural differences, however way that you define them, but we should have an overarching united factor that brings us together as people who originate from the Somali territories. That's something that I want you guys to really think about, and how you can participate in that, how you can be part of that beyond the times that bring us together and on a day-to-day basis. So I leave you with 3 questions as we continue. 1, what can a transnational Somali public look like? 2, how can it come into being? And 3, what role can you play with the resources and the skill set that you have? Thank you very much.
And we're going to come back to you, the audience, very soon. Before I give the word, I'll first give the word to the rest of our panelists, but please think through those 3 questions, and we look forward to your contributions as well. Thank you, Idil, for that incredibly moving personal account of the experiences that you've shared with us. What I would like to now do is invite Hannah also to the discussions. And in particular, Hannah, one of the things that struck me about Idil's contribution is that she particularly focused on the mobilization of the Somali community, the quick response to whether it's a humanitarian crisis or even a charitable, charitable organization for charitable events. And of course, events like these. What maybe you can tell us a little bit about, and I'm sure you've also prepared your own insight into this, about what it is about belonging in the Somali community through arts and culture and identity that may generate this mobilization. Hannah, welcome.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very important question and a very important topic. In particular, it gives you a lot to think about, that why we are able to sort of come together in times of crises, and in that sort of immediate sense of wanting to help your fellow Somali person. And I think what Idil described it as Somaliness, or perhaps what is otherwise known as Somalinimo, that sort of greater sense of being a Somali and having that deep sort of empathy for each other, I think is incredibly important. And it shows that I believe that Somali people are innately incredibly empathetic towards each other and empathetic towards others. And the fact that we have been able to see that through social media, see that through the money that has been raised, the amount of attention that has been able to be given to this situation, really shows that the Somali youth in particular, the younger generation, the millennial generation, the generation that really stays very active on social media, have been able to take a platform that was otherwise used for perhaps just sort of sharing your everyday life or non-important matters, but in fact they've turned it into an incredibly powerful tool that enables us to connect with each other and show that a Somali living in London has the same type of empathy and rage and sadness and sorrow for what's happening as much as somebody who is in the region, as much as somebody who's in Australia, who's in other parts of Europe. And I think it really shows how sadness unites and happiness unites. And I think what we are left to think about after Idil's incredible speech is that what is it in between that, in between the sad events, in between the bombings, in between one horror event to another, beyond just the moment of the hashtag, what is it that can sort of unite us and make us feel that actually we have a lot more in common than not. And I think those are really important things to consider.
Thank you very much, Hannah. What strikes me from what you both have said is And what I find very fascinating is that it's not just only in times of sadness, but also if I think about the festival and the visiting guests that come every year, we always have a queue of people fighting over hosting our visiting artist. And the entire weeks and months that they are here, the organizers never need to worry about where they're going to be staying, how they're going to get around London. They're invited to events and parties, and it's quite remarkable that happens. And if I also look at our audience here, I see a lot of young people who somehow through the experience of displacement, either the displacement of their parents, feel a sense of belonging to this idea of Somaliness, which I imagine has evolved greatly to the iteration of Somaliness that maybe our parents have grown up to understand. What I'd like to do at this point is also to bring in Julian Riley to respond to some of the contributions that you've heard. Julian, any thoughts?
Thank you very much. Salam alaikum. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here again. Just before I begin to answer some of those points, I think actually a running theme through this has been the events of last weekend. So as well as adding my own personal condolences for what was a truly horrific attack on an enormous scale, I just wanted also to recall what the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary and the Minister for Africa, so my bosses and our leaders, have said about that in Parliament this week, where all of them were struck and horrified, and it's been part of everything we said, and so highlighting their statements, and also actually, but then also to reflect on what we can all do. And I jotted down here, what is the UK response? I think the most important UK response actually is that the Somali community has already done so much and sprung together in the way that you're calling so loudly and actively for proper action and calling for new action. But of course the British government continues to do its part, whether on a personal level, and my colleague David Konkar, the ambassador in Mogadishu, was this morning helping hand out British aid to victims through Save the Children. He and his team earlier in the week went to do their small part by giving blood. But more, and on the larger scale, of course, the government continues to use your money, taxpayers' money, to contribute towards building a better future for all Somalis in Somalia and in Somaliland through a huge response to the humanitarian crisis caused by the drought across the region, but also by trying to build up the necessary security services, etc., to enable the kind of responses that we need to see to stop these attacks from happening in any cities or in the countryside across the Somali region. But beginning to respond to some of the points which has been raised, I think first of all, just what the Sheikh said at the beginning, it's absolutely crucial that we all work together to help those who have been left behind and to build on that. So I think that whether it is foreign donors coming in or it is the Somali people themselves working together, it's absolutely crucial. Dr. Idil, you talked about what happens next. And we've also heard talk about the huge importance of everybody pulling together, whether that's the international community pulling together with the Somali people, or whether it's actually the Somali people all pulling together yourselves, wherever you're from. And I think we've begun to hear a little bit about cultural unity and a unity of purpose. Now, that unity of purpose, I think, always, it always comes, as you say, at times of tragedy and of sadness, and at times of happiness. But actually, it also has to last right through the middle times. And I think that we all need to work to get that bit to working better together, because it's only when everybody is working together building a stronger state or stronger states, building a stronger community, and acting together that it'll be possible totally to close off the space for those horrendous people who commit such crimes as happened last week. I really liked what you said, social difference, political difference. That doesn't mean there can't be a shared community. And I think that's a hugely important thing to point out. Beginning to respond again to some of the other points that have been made. I mean, the audience here, lots of young people here. I think, and in my work at the Foreign Office and with Caroline, my colleague up in the audience, bringing together some representatives of young Somali communities coming into the Foreign Office and talking to us. I always find that a really exciting and inspiring part of my job, because actually what I hear is I hear hope, I hear ideas, I hear people who have really interesting dual identities. British people who are Somalis, Somalis who are British. And some of the people who I've talked to sort of struggle with that dual identity. Others really embrace it. I think it's really important that all of us, and as the Deputy Mayor said, embrace what the Somali community brings to all of London and all of Britain. And there are, of course, communities. And the Somali community, I think, is one of the very largest diaspora communities in the UK, at least 300,000. I believe it's also one of the oldest communities, because although the majority are, of course, forced displacement, I think that's a really important point. It would be interesting to explore through discussion. But actually, I think that the first Somali community was in Cardiff in the 19th century, presumably linked to the trade that we had with the Horn of Africa. So, you know, there's a real history there as well, which we also need to embrace. But youth, social media, hugely important for breaking down the barriers. You know, when I'm in the Somali regions, and recently in the summer I was in Mogadishu, I was in Hargeisa, I'm always struck. There's everybody there with their mobile phones, sort of, you know, shooting out stuff around over the globe, ideas, thoughts, conversations. Also, political ideas, activism, raising money. That's really important. And I think those connections give agency. What I mean by that is the Somali region, Somalia, Somaliland, have come through some really tough times. And it's been a partnership with the international community to help rebuild what is your society and culture, and or the state that supports that. It's entirely different, actually. I mean, all we do is we help with the state building and helping to develop the security to provide to Somali people a little bit of what is needed to rebuild the cultural unity that we were talking about. So that agency is how the people working together through culture, through a strong sense of united identity, can actually change things. But one of the, what is it that actually allows you to find that middle ground between the sad times and the happy times? In a way, the answer is quite boring, but it's also quite exciting. Because I think the exciting bit is civil society, and there's more than 100 Somali organisations all united together in Britain, and that's absolutely fantastic. There's really strong civil society organisations, and when I've been there and when I've been out in Mogadishu recently with the Minister for Africa, we were meeting representatives of civil society also in Hargeisa. So I know that that's all of there. So civil society is hugely important. Institutions are hugely important. People come and go. Different political parties come in and out of power over time. But once you've started to build institutions, parliaments, civil services, civil society, the hospitals, the schools, etc., and once you've got a firmly established constitution or constitutions which provide the rules which govern for that, then you begin to have a really strong, clear framework in which everyone can have a really good argument, totally disagreeing about what to do next, fighting over sort of, the next direction, but actually fighting in words and ideas through a united culture, and no longer being caught in the conflict which has so sadly affected so much of the region for so long. And when I think we are coming out, I mean, I'd just say a thank you to the Somali community also for the contribution that you made to the London Somalia Conference, which we held here in May. It was really great that we had preparatory events to bring in the ideas, and we then, for the first time, actually had a civil society representative presenting to all of the presidents and prime ministers and foreign ministers who came about what ordinary Somali people want and think, and that was hugely important. And I like to think that that made a bit of a difference to empowering Somali civil society also in the Somali region. So I'll stop there with those introductory remarks, but I just, first of all, wanted to say a huge thank you for the privilege of being able to join this panel and to celebrate the beginning of the Somali Cultural Week, and also to thank the organisers for doing that. And actually, home and displacement is the theme. And I was struck as everyone was talking that this festival and the Somali culture that it's celebrating is actually what provides the home for all of us to have this debate and this discussion. So well done to all of you, and it's great to be here.
Thank you very much, Julian. Before I open it up for discussions, I'd like to briefly also bring Matthew on board, and particularly on the part of the theme that relates to home. In this wonderful city that many of us call home, and which touches upon your portfolio so much in terms of diversity, integration, social mobility. What is it in particular about the Somali community, but any migrant, refugee community, the diverse community that lives here in London now, and the shared togetherness that we are all trying to encourage and promote? What is it about your portfolios? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you see in your portfolio in bringing together the togetherness of this diverse community?
That's a big question. I think the first thing is the Somali community and a lot of communities across London are having to grapple with, as Julian was describing, a sense of having two homes and being having thoughts and love and your heart in two places at the same time. And in doing so, that doesn't mean that those two things should pull against each other. And part of what my brief is to do is to make sure that all Londoners feel very, very much part of London, and they feel that London is their home, and that they're part of London's personality, and that they are as much, the Somali person who's come here at age 5 and has grown up here and lived here all their life is as much part of London as somebody who is a city trader or has grown up from a completely different part of the world and has come here. Everybody must feel really engaged with London. Because if you don't allow people to take ownership of the city and ownership of their own lives within this city, then you're not allowing them to properly live the life they want to live while they're here. At the same time, people also have to be allowed to feel the connection with home. They shouldn't be made to feel that they're choosing between the two. Most people who are from migrant communities here feel a very powerful connection to their heritage, whether it's their own sense of that memory of that heritage or the memory they received through their community and their parents. And so they need to feel engaged with that. And so part of what we're really trying to do from the Mayor's office, if you take the Somali community, for example, is to make sure that we're understanding what the needs of that community are. We're not the government, so we're not in a position to provide, big resources for really big events. What we can do is provide advocacy, and I think if you're saying the Mayor's advocacy around the issue last week hasn't been strong enough or hasn't been loud enough, then it's an important message to get to the Mayor. I'm grateful for you telling me that. And it's important that we get that message out to the Mayor so that he can respond in the right way. But what we want to do in order to be able to do that is have a connection and a dialogue with that community so that we understand what you need. Some of those will be London needs. Some of those are about needs for the youth, whether it's employment, education, whether it's issues to do with engagement in activities that the community wants to steer young people away from. Some of those will be to do with the cultural issues, making sure that more positive images of Somali people as they're part of British culture get put out there and people get to experience that. And some of them will be issues that just affect people's normal lives, housing, employment, things like that. So our job is to try and make sure that we have a really good connection and dialogue with the Somali community. I really want to kind of get the message out to everybody here, including the people that work with organisations as well as individuals, that we really want, you have an open door to City Hall. We want you to know with our community engagement team and everybody else that if you have issues that you want to raise with us, we want to hear about them and we want to respond in any way we can. We want to bring people to the table that can help, and we want to help in any way we can do so. We want the Mayor to be an advocate on your behalf.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Matthew. And I'm sure you would have experienced now that the Somali community is very vocal and outspoken. So be careful what you ask for. And this goes out to you. This is your opportunity also to initiate the first discussions with Matthew about some of the issues that he's highlighted. Idil has so beautifully told us about this kind of the Somali identity that we are all proud of. Somali Londoners, Somali Brits, Somali Dutch Somalis, Finnish Somalis, and American Somalis, North American Somalis. We've got the wonderful, we've got wonderful people now in the public sphere, whether it is a wonderful model, whether it is Mo Farah, who are identifying themselves and their successes, not just with the home country that they have adopted, but also with their with the home that they have left. So this dual identity that I believe we are in a time that we can be very proud to be Somali across the globe, wherever we are. So I'd like to open it up now to the audience. I'm sure that you will have lots of interesting questions and contributions to make. I will only remind you to, if you can, to keep your remarks and questions as brief as possible so that we can give optimum kind of opportunity to everyone to have their say. There are roaming mics around, so who's going to start us off with the first remark? I can see there in the corner a hand was raised. Yes. And if you can briefly state your name.
Okay. So my name is Sagal. This is a question to Matthew. It's been almost a week since the Mogadishu attack, and the mayor have failed to sort of show solidarity with the British Somali community. So I'm not sure why that is. So maybe you could explain.
I think she came late.
Yes, Sagal, there was a message, I don't know if you've heard, but I'll also give Matthew the opportunity to respond to that. A message has just been conveyed by Matthew himself and on behalf of the Mayor of London. But as Idil has reminded us all, that message can be much more vocal and public.
Can I just add to that? I mean, from last weekend, the Mayor did issue statements on social media and in other ways out there explaining his sympathy and condolences for the people of Somalia, for people in Mogadishu and what had happened. So it's not as though he was completely silent on the issue. He was making statements as almost from the instant that it happened. But obviously he wanted to be here tonight in his place. I read a direct message from him. But I think it's right to say, no matter what, if the Mayor has made statements on social media, or I've made a statement on his behalf, if this community, if you as Londoners and your Mayor, you don't feel your Mayor is representing your voice, is acknowledging the incident loudly enough, is being a strong enough advocate, then that's why I'm here, so that you can tell me that and I can take that back to him and make sure that we rectify that. He's your Mayor, and he will feel that he is not done enough if you feel he hasn't done enough. And so from that point of view, I want to take that message back to him, want to make sure that we do as much as we can to redress that. I can tell you directly from having spoken to him, it's not because he hasn't had enormous heartfelt emotion attached to the events and to the people and to Londoners who are affected, as well as just as a human being, the incident. But if that message hasn't come across loudly enough and he hasn't done enough compared to what's been done in for example, in Canada or in other places, then we must rectify that. And I intend to take that message to him.
Thank you very much. What I'll do is I'll take a couple of questions in one go. So if you can keep it very brief. Let's start with this gentleman. There's a microphone right here.
I'm Ibrahim. My question, I want to ask, Idil, whether she found, when it comes into home and identity, the first people have been displaced and the second generation. Well, you talk about Somaliness. Do you find any difference when it comes into Somaliness? between the first people who have been, displaced, and the second generation who actually grown up here and actually fed and lived it and studied here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next question or comment. I can't see any more hands up, but I'm sure there are a lot of yes right there.
Hiya. I just wanted to put to the panel, that whenever you see images of Somalia, in the past, over the 30 years, the images are desensitized. They show graphic images. Mashallah, this time there's being different. There's more human stories. I think the media should treat differently when it comes to Africa and these places. And also the second is the rumors that are flying about between the different groups is pretty wild these days. And I was wondering the role of the media in spreading in the internet all these rumors, and they cause more conflict and distrust among the different groups. Thank you.
Okay, I think that was a general remark as well. And are there any other contributions before I revert to the panel? And right here, thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Hussein. Talking from Idil was talking about travelling around and people being forced to leave Somaliland and going to Holland and then coming to Britain. Do you feel valued here? Or do you feel equal to when you were in Holland? Is there a difference between the value you feel of yourself wherever you're based? Does that make sense?
Great. Thank you very much. So we've got a question about what Somaliness means to different generations of Somalis. When it comes to these two concepts. And what is interesting is we had a panel last year at Somali Week Festival exclusively dedicated to unpacking the idea of Somaliness. And what struck with me was that after almost an hour and a half discussions, we couldn't agree on a shared definition of what Somaliness is. And maybe that's also the richness of what this concept embodies. But very fortunate to have Idil's insight into that. And then we also had the remark about a little bit about the sensational coverage of issues when it relates to the Somali community. And maybe some of the baggages I would add to the term migrant, refugee, some of these negative connotations that are attached to it, given that the Somali communities are part of these constituencies, which I guess the entire panel can comment on. And then we have not necessarily a question about displacement, but secondary migration within Europe. And the Somali community is very mobile, whether it is within Europe and from North America to Europe, back home. This constant movement, this unwillingness to be tied down to one specific place, and how that has an impact on identity and the experiences that secondary migration may bring about. So if I start off first with Idil.
Sure. The difference of displacement between generations. I think there's a big difference. I can speak from a second generation perspective, although I just barely make that group, I think. But when you look at our parents' generation, they fled the war, they've experienced the war, they are traumatized still to this day from the atrocities and the things that they have witnessed, that they had to bear without having to do so. I mean, the book that was up here, maybe we could get it up again when the museum curator was presenting. One of them is actually a book that I co-authored on that side. And that book, The Somalia to Europe, is a dual language book. The Somali version is called Hayanki Europe Somalia. And the book basically answers that question in very multifaceted way that tells it through the lived experiences of the people that have experiences. So we've separated it into two chapters, one looking at the older generation and the other one at the younger generation. And so the older generation, one of the things that for me, despite the differences in the level of trauma and conflict that they've experienced, the one common thread that ran across that was we were interviewing them 20-something years later, and they still remembered every minute of that horrific journey that they made. One of the women would tell you about how she had to give birth whilst fleeing from Mogadishu en route with no water, no sanitation, no medical support, nothing. For weeks, she had to flee so that she could make it to Kismayo, bought the boat to the refugee camps in Kenya. Another one would tell, and she would remember vividly and tell you those details. Another one would tell you about how she had to witness her husband being killed in front of her, and she was forced to watch as he was being killed and mutilated. These things, they stay with you. And I think because, our parents really are due some serious levels of award and recognition for the fact that they've been able to raise us to be, functioning citizens that are productive in their societies that they belong to, despite carrying all of that baggage. That's really important. And so the second generation is void of that conflict. I think the older generation, because they still have that connection to the conflict, they still have connection to the factors that fuel the conflict as well. So we're talking clanism, we're talking differences in ideologies, we're talking political tensions and all that. But where I see the hope is that the younger generation are able to engage with their sense of responsibilities towards their host land and their sense of responsibilities towards their homeland, without having a conflict baggage, if that makes any sense, right? And so that helps them to oversee and look beyond what it is that fragments us, what it is that separates us and puts us in different corners. They are able to unite based on shared civic identities, shared professions. I mean, one of the things that I love to see is to see, students, as a teacher, I'll always be biased to students, but when I see students that come together because they all study agriculture, for example, and they come together and they mentor students that are studying agriculture in Somali universities, or they go and do programs and projects to help the agriculture industry over there. I mean, these are the kind of things that I think that where the hope lies, and that's where the future lies, and that's what we should invest in.
Maybe if I direct this, one of the questions to Julian and Matthew as well. In particular, the negative coverage sometimes, the negative associations that are attached to the Somali community, considering the conflict that has been so protracted, whether it's piracy, these very negative experiences that are a reality in addition to the very positive ones. Now we've got people like Mo Farah, Halima Aden, who are now actually challenging these negative, the negative coverage that we have in the media. But it's not just up to individuals to also showcase and spotlight some of the wonderful experiences and contributions that the Somali community are making both here in London and globally in the diaspora. It could be attainment at university, it could be entrepreneurship that the Somali community is famous for, poetry, arts and culture, the reasons why we are here today, some of this rich history. What are maybe your thoughts on how both the Mayor's Office and in particular you in your mandate can help the Somali community to bring this experience to a wider audience? And the same goes to you as well, Julian, in terms of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, that how do we showcase the wonderful things that are happening back home? Last night I was on social media very late. In addition to the amazing mobilization that we've seen around these horrific attacks, there was a presidential debate in Somaliland, and it gathered so much attention. We want to also highlight the positives, the democratization that is taking place. And it has been made possible by Somali people using their voices on social media, that mainstream media, it's much more difficult to break these stereotypes. So how do we tackle that? From a London perspective,
sure.
and then...
Shall I go first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things I want to say about that. The first thing is, I do think it's really important that we champion much more positive images and the full kind of complexity but diversity within what it is to be Somali, as you would with any other community. And that's really important to balance out the fact that you will get tragic images like we've had on the news recently or whatever. But those images can't be made to dominate people's perception of who Somali people are and what their culture is and what the long heritage and history is. It's exactly why in the opening remarks I said it was so important to champion this festival and other cultural events and other aspects of how people see the Somali community across London and across the UK generally, and how they have to understand that that community and that culture and that heritage, that shared tradition, is part of being Britain and part of what modern Britain is all about. I mean, I think the example you give, for example, of Mo Farah is a good example, but I would make one qualification on that, which is that we can't make the good Somalian the kind of exceptional person. So we have this exceptional, amazing, world-beating Somali figure who everybody loves and admires. But people have to understand that Somalians and the fantastic diversity of what Somalia has achieved, what Somali culture is all about, isn't about one amazing person who can run really fast. It's about culture, heritage, art, intellectual pursuit, all of those things. And also they have to understand that just because they like Mo Farah, that there are a million Mo Farahs or other people, a million diverse, important, interesting people who do many, many other things that are living right alongside them in London. And so I think we've got to, in a sense, get away from that idea of the exceptional, amazing person and start to understand that it's much more about the people around you and who they are. I think that there was a second issue you were saying about identity, and the only thing I wanted to say about that, I thought what you were saying was really interesting about identity, but there is another point, and the gentleman over here who asked the question about it, I think just very, very briefly, there's one thing I'd say about that, which is that for most migrant communities, and from what you were saying, it sounds like it's an issue in the Somali community as well. The first generation that comes, sometimes as refugees, are a generation that have been through amazing hardship, are often really traumatized, and often they feel a very grateful relationship to the country that's taken them in. The second generation can sometimes feel very frustrated about that, because the gentleman over here was asking about how do you feel equal? Do you feel you are treated as an equal? And that's in the second generation when they feel, well, hold on, this is my home. I grew up here, I live here. Why are you not treating me as any other British person is treated? This is my home. And I think that sense of equality, fairness, is a really important part of integrating people into a community. And unless people feel they're being treated fairly, then they don't feel connected with their environment. And so part of our job is to make sure not only do we really respect, and I think it's so important what you said, that the trauma and the journey of that first generation, but we also must respect the contribution, the equality, the level of engagement that the second generation gives to the culture that they're living in now, to make sure that they feel part, that they're contributing, they feel ownership of modern Britain and modern London. Otherwise, you develop a schism that you can't repair.
Absolutely. I couldn't underscore that more. For me, as someone who has the lived experience to compare the UK with, of being in Holland. I mean, I remember being at primary school, and I finished my whole primary school there and part of my secondary school. From as far as I can remember, I always wanted to do something in communication. I didn't quite know whether there was such thing as a journalism career or something, or anything communication, but what I knew is that I wanted to do that. And I remember never getting any support from my schools. It was only my mother, who was a soldier and galvanizing, and you could do everything, you could do anything.
Mothers are good like that.
No, seriously, yeah. Mothers are the beacons that we survive on. But I don't ever remember getting any support until I moved here, and I was able to go to secondary school here, finish year 10 and 11, go to do my A-levels, and my students and my teachers, and the mentoring, the assistant staff, they were all able to, think about you and say, okay, what is it that you are interested in? And then find the ways that you can, but the thing is, that is important to acknowledge, and we should celebrate the fact that we have opportunities here that other migrants in other countries, especially European countries, don't have. That's
we can still do more.
But we can still do more. And on top of that, I also want to encourage the young people to not just wait for social services and or the mayor's office to come and engage with you, but to go and get what you're worth. You need to go out there and do what you need to do. For me, that is, you are in charge of your destiny. Nobody is here to tell you you are British. You know you're British. You know you've got every right, just like anybody else, because you live here. This is your home. You have every single right to flourish and do whatever you want to. But you need to put in the effort. That's an important thing that I want to underline. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Just before I address the sort of positive images, negative images thing, obviously I can't answer the question, what is Somaliness, because I'm not Somali. But here's a really short answer for you that I'll hazard as an outsider is, surely Somaliness is whatever you feel, whatever you are. And actually, all of you together, as a community, coming together, that's Somaliness in all of its diversity and difference and its argument and everything else. And that's fantastic, and that's such a great contribution to British society as well. So there's a small thought on that. Which actually also links into the question about, the real problem of, there were two issues that the gentleman raised, one of which was negative images in the media, but also the other was the swirling of rumour, which I actually associate with social media, which is a fantastic tool for generating good and gathering together. It's also a really irritating way of viruses of pernicious nonsense getting out there too, the fake news thing that you mentioned earlier. And I think there's a huge responsibility on individuals, members of society there, actually to have a sense of ownership and agency. So, as you were saying, go out there and demand what you want. So, if you want stuff from London, if you want stuff from society, if you want some, you have to go and ask for it. If you want different images, we now have a huge new tool, really powerful tool for pushing out new stories, positive stories. I really like the point about actually Mo Farah is fab. We love him. Nadifa Mohammed is a fabulous writer who's been celebrated as a British Somali author, and she was on the Hay Festival's Africa 39 list. She's she's part of the next generation of African literature. She's part of the next generation of British literature. That's fabulous. You've got people working in so many different, areas. So to name just another example, and Leila Hussein and Nima Ali, who are named as two of the sort of Britain's most influential women. So there are some real role models out there. But actually, it's also absolutely true. The stars are the stars who are not famous. It's every one of you who's becoming a doctor, who's becoming a teacher, who's part of British society, bringing something. And not only that, because we were talking earlier about dual identity, I think it's also the real stars and the heroes and the people that we need to be celebrating, both in public media and in social media, are the many, many thousands of Somalis who are going back to Somaliland, going back to Somalia, and they're setting up new businesses. One of the things that we were celebrating and talking about and trying to generate at the London Somalia conference in May was economic development, was the growth of civil society. There's some amazing stuff going on. The economy, it's not great, but it's growing, and it's growing quite fast. And one of the reasons it's growing, it is a fact that all the government aid that comes in from different countries is less than the money that the diaspora sends into the Somali region every year. So it's you guys who are actually building the Somali region back. And we just need more stories about that. On the 10 o'clock news, it's going to be the bad stuff. It's always the bad stuff, whether it's in Britain or it's abroad, it's in Somalia. Of course, a horror story makes good news. That's sad. But there's other ways of getting out good news stories. And you start to see it, I think, but I'd love to see more. And my suggestion is actually that we should all be using social media to celebrate that. And certainly, sort of, in our small way at the Foreign Office and through our embassy, our team are trying to use social media and all of those avenues. When we go and find something great out there, we take pictures, we talk about it, we push it out. And then all of you guys, if you like it, you retweet it. So there is actually agency there. It's a word I want to come back to. You have agency to help change that. We have agency to change that. And those of us who know the Somali region, it's our responsibility to begin to change that story. So let's do it.
Could I just take 5 seconds? So we're in Black History Month. We really have been celebrating Black History Month a lot this year. It's the 30th anniversary of UK Black History Month. But just as part of that, people probably know every year a group called Powerful Media does something called the Power List, which is the 100 most influential black people in the UK. And last year, one of the key new people on the Power List was Ismail Ahmed, who has World Remit, raised $100 million in funding for his fintech company based in London, but originally from Somaliland. Now, someone like that, a fintech Somali business person who has come to London and raised hundreds of millions in funding for his company, people won't necessarily hear about him in the way they'll hear about an author or an athlete or somebody like that. But he's that is a story that we have to tell. We have to get it out there and let people know that in business and arts and everything, there are Somali people doing amazing things, and London is a place where it can be done. And I totally agree that we should be putting out those stories there and letting people know there are role models out there, not only who have done it, but who can help you do it too. You know what I mean?
Thank you so much, Matthew, and Julian and the panel for reminding us of the everyday stars, the everyday heroes, the people who work in communities, the doctors at our hospitals. For instance, I was reading that there were so many doctors after the Manchester attack of Muslim background who'd been working ridiculous shifts, and you've got these dual experiences of the negative coverage of Muslims in the UK, in London, while at the same time they're tending to the wounds of victims. And it is people like the founders of World Remit and big remittance companies who've done staggeringly well in a very difficult climate to promote entrepreneurship, something that Somalis are world famous for. Somalis are also world famous, Hannah, for, if I can bring you very briefly in before I return to the audience, for arts and culture, for poetry, for writing. And I'm just very interested to know how also the arts as a medium has been used to explore these questions of identity and belonging and displacement, and whether there has been changes in new generation production, knowledge production, compared to the production of older generations. What are your thoughts in particular, given that this is a festival about arts and culture, also how the arts is used as a platform to address difficult issues that may be challenging to discuss in a political atmosphere, but much more enriching when they are done in a painting or in a poem or in a film?
Absolutely. I mean, Somalis are known to be a nation of poets. We are very sort of creative people, and I think that art in particular is very, very powerful. I do believe that art can heal. I believe that art can be something that allows you to speak your truth in a creative format, and to speak your truth in a way that kind of perhaps protects you from necessarily revealing all of your wounds, let's say, but it also allows you to express the trauma, the hurt, the joys, everything that sort of has shaped your identity. The wonderful cultural theorist Stuart Hall sort of talks about identity as something that's not necessarily just who you really are, but also he mentions, since history has intervened, who you've become. So there's this idea of you thinking that your identity is something that you're in control of. It's the core of your being. You know exactly who you are. You're in charge of it. But also there's this other factor that actually what if who you are is in fact what you've become. It's a product of your history, it's a product of your childhood, it's a product of your trauma, it's a product of your joys, it's a product of everything that has shaped you to lead you to the moment that you find yourself in today. And I think questions like what is Somaliness, which I feel we talk about all the time, and there is this kind of obsession about what is Somaliness? And that kind of reminds me of what Idil was saying about really going out there and taking charge. And in the same way that nobody sort of has to tell you that you're British, I really do believe that nobody has to tell you that you're Somali. And there's this idea that if you keep asking the question, what is Somaliness, what is Somaliness, you're almost sort of trying to get an answer, you're almost trying to get somebody to validate you, to recognize you, to say that, yes, I am actually Somali, even though I am from this clan, even though I believe this, even that. You don't need that. Being Somali is a lived experience. You believe yourself to be Somali. You are Somali. You feel it. It's a part of your heritage, your culture, your family, your parents, your appearance, your food, everything about you. So I feel like it's very important to discuss questions of identity, and that comes across a lot in the arts through poetry and music and photography and some of the talent that we'll be able to see during this festival. But I do sort of find that it's important to be cautious about the intention behind the question of what is Somaliness. It's really important to understand that you are in charge of who you are. You are Somali. There is no discussion that needs to sort of lead in order to validate it or to sort of make it really central to who you are. That's another thing. I think art is a really, really important aspect of this festival. I feel really lucky to be one of the project managers alongside Aisha Afrah, and it's been months of planning, and the fact that we are able to bring, we've got designers, we've got different types of artists, we've got scholars, we've got poets, we've got musicians. These people are really important because they allow you to see that the Somali identity and the Somali experience, which of course is really different, everybody has had their different experiences, is something that can be shared through a creative format. And it's something that can be enjoyed. It's not something that has to be seen through the gaze of something that happens on the news, something sort of bad, and that you associate Somalis with sadness and sort of horror stories. But in fact, there are individual stories. And that's one of the things I think somebody mentioned with social media this year was particularly different to what happened in Mogadishu, because we were able to see that actually the people that were affected by this were individuals. You know, there was one girl in particular who was studying to become a doctor, and her picture and her story was shared a lot. And it allows people to understand that we're not just a number. It's not just a question of 300 people perish. We're actually stories. We are accomplishments. And of course, behind the people that died are the people that rose them up, the people that pushed them, the people that will miss them. And I think this festival is really important because in light of everything that's happened, we are able to actually say that the Somali resilience and the Somali strength and the Somali spirit is one that can get damaged and can get bruised, but we always rise.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for those inspirational closing remarks. And I feel incredibly ironic to repeat the message that came from Idil about using your voice and not giving you the opportunity to ask more questions and make further remarks. But unfortunately, we have run out of time. That doesn't mean that you will not have an opportunity to also give us your thoughts and insights on these fascinating concepts that we're going to be discussing throughout the rest of the week. And I hope that you will be with us. And we've got 9 days of events and gatherings and presentations and talks all revolved around this theme. I hope that our panel have done justice to the complexity of it, and I'm certain they have done that. I would just like to reiterate that the exceptional Somali role models are also incredibly important. If it wasn't for Raga Umar, presenting the news and being a correspondent with ITV, the attention that was given to the drought this year would have not entered mainstream media. If it wasn't for Halima Aden grazing the coverage, the covers of our magazines, our young girls in hijabs would not feel beautiful. So I would also like to acknowledge those wonderful Somalis who are putting themselves out there in the spotlight and in the public eye. And we love you and we celebrate you, and to our everyday heroes like yourselves, thank you for being with us. We're going to end the evening now on a slightly lighter note. We have a wonderful Somali artist who's going to be joining us, and I wouldn't be lying if I said that she is one of the most beloved contemporary Somali singers, Farhia Fiska. But before I invite her, please join me in thanking and welcoming again our lovely panelists, Matthew Ryder, Idil Usman, Hannah Ali, and Julian Riley. Thank you very much. Stay seated. We're not going to have a break. We're going to just reshuffle the stage and then invite Farhia Fiska to sing along to some of her wonderful songs. Thank you.
Thank you. Wahadi gabagabadi. La 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 la. Yeah, 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 yeah. Lay, 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 lay. Lay, 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 la, la, la. tahay meel qaabo ka baxo halaqaadeel ubaxi dama qariyo hawna qacadiyaan ku arkaan isqoonsadayo bal qabso abanku Kanda isnay bal qabso wabanku kanda isnay yalla hala hala shuba 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 la 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 yeah, 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 yeah. La 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 oye habar balo madinto allahaduna subaxdi horte ma kacde alaaniyo hilbahay gikala hoyano ama hombinaso Talay helay bal qabso wabanku khanda isnay hala 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 shuba shuba see la 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 yeah, 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 yeah. La 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 tahay meel قاتل قابو كبحو هلا قاتل وبحي داما قاريو ونقعدي كواركاها إسقو صادايو بالقبسو وبانكو غانا إسناي بالقبسو وبانكو غانا إسناي هلا بالقبسو وبانكو غانا إسناي بالقبسو وبانكو Thank you. Aad oo mahadsantiin walaale. Idinkana waa idin wada salaamay.